This reading is from Practice of the Presence, a revolutionary translation by Carmen Acevedo Butcher, read by the Translator author. Originally written by Nicolas Herman, or Brother Lawrence of the Resurrection, this spiritual classic has diverse global appeal. You'll hear sections 7 through 10 from the introduction. War, Plague, Little Ice Age. Herman was also born into a time of war. From age 4 until 34, he lived while the 30 Years' War raged through Central Europe. This devastating series of religious civil wars began between Roman Catholics and Protestants and quickly expanded to include land grabs and profiteering. Eventually, the 30 Years' War involved most Central European nations and territories. It became infamous as one of Europe's deadliest wars. Killing became an industry, involving not only national armies, but also armed marauders and mercenary troops. It perpetrated long-lasting tragedies of plundering and unimaginable violence towards civilians. It brought scourges of hunger and disease. The human losses have proven impossible to count, much less process. To contemplate its incomprehensible scale, some estimate that these 3 decades claimed the lives of 500,000 soldiers and 8 million lives, including civilians. That is one individual soul lost 8 million times. Its repercussions are still felt today. 10 years into this 30 Years' War, France also knew the first of 3 bubonic plague epidemics in the 17th century. Historian Geoffrey Parker, in Global Crisis, estimates French deaths that century by plague were 2 million. The initial epidemic was the most widespread, affecting the whole country from 1628 to 1631. Nicholas was a teenager when the Black Death spread throughout the country. 5 years later, France's second plague epidemic of that century occurred, lasting a year. And some 3 decades on, the plague returned for yet another year. Herman lived through plague in his teens, 20s, and 50s. Quarantine restrictions were mandated, reducing the spread and timeline of each successive wave. In his lifetime, Herman also experienced 5 decades of destructive global climatic conditions, where 1/3 or more of the entire human population perished. Climatologists call this period from 1640 to 1690 the Little Ice Age. It had the coldest weather on record in over 1,000 years, and the winters of 6 months or more brought unusually heavy snowfalls, followed by spring floods when the snows finally melted. The Seine burst its banks regularly, flooding Parisians' houses. Crops failed. Millions starved. 5 feet and 3 inches. A gilded government mishandled this cataclysmic Little Ice Age and the economic stagnation after the 30 Years' War. Taxes were imposed on starving citizens who revolted in the streets shouting, "No kings, no princes." The incalculable suffering of this century warrants an entire chapter in Parker's Global Crisis titled France in Crisis 1618 to 1688. Dates that nearly match the 1614-1691 lifespan of Nicolas Herman, Brother Lawrence. Starvation was so prevalent among the Third Estate that its effects showed visibly. Of thousands enlisting in Louis XIV's army, men born in famine years between 1666 and 1694 had an average height of only 5 feet and 3 inches, the lowest on record in France. This stunting from starvation also damaged the development of major organs and immune systems of those living in the third estate, leaving malnourished children more vulnerable to contagious and chronic diseases. These grim facts manifest in other ways. Frequently, noblemen of this period are described rather loftily as, quote, tall, which belies a complex social reality where increased physical stature often marked a well-fed childhood, good health, and also 17th century social status. 19 and a soldier. Within these social realities, Nicolas Herman decided to enter the heinous 30 Years' War as a soldier at around the age of 19. A young man from an impoverished background and with no social or political advantages would likely see this move as providing him with food, structure for his days, and a stipend. Also, the French took control of the independent Duchy of Lorraine in 1634 until 1661, possibly influencing his decision as a Lorrainer to join the local militia. During his short military career, he performed many mindless marches and delivered messages. He also became a prisoner of war, captured and arrested by advancing German troops from Bernard of Saxe-Weimar's army. He was accused of spying and threatened with death. Years later, he told this harrowing story to his good friend Joseph of Beaufort, a Parisian priest who, in the last words of this book, describes how Herman escaped this dangerous situation. Injuries in war. In 1635, at the siege of Rambervillers, young Herman was badly wounded in his leg. When the Duke of Lorraine launched an attack against the French there to regain this lost territory, Herman was likely among the troops that broke through town walls on August 10th and took back Rambervillers. Though hurt, he somehow made it the 30 kilometers north and home to his parents in Ermenil. And at about 21, he quit the military. This leg injury persisted the rest of his life, and he lived with pain and a limp from then on. Beaufort says in Last Words that his friend lived, quote, simply and with integrity while in the military. Just as we have few details of his childhood and teenage years, we don't know what else may have happened during Herman's soldiering in the 30 Years' War. But we see signs in this book that his military period caused him profound anguish for reasons unknown, whether the atrocities of combat he may have witnessed or the guilt he may have carried. Historians' accounts of this war's violence and trauma recall our still inchoate understanding of complex post-traumatic stress disorder experienced by soldiers and civilians, and how many suffer in silence. The Miseries of War. A set of 18 miniature etchings from 1633 by the Lorraine printmaker Jacques Callot witnesses to the, quote, astonishing bodily suffering of the 30 Years' War and its, quote, total and pervasive trauma, as Professor Hilary L. Shute says in Disaster Drawn. Beaufort shares that his friend, quote, often relived in his mind the dangers of his days in military service and the emptiness and corruption of the times. We read that Herman spent years, quote, meditating on the disorders of his youth, and that these caused him, quote, horror. Many times we hear he, quote, asked forgiveness, resolved to give himself completely to God, and to change and to atone for his past conduct, and did all he could to make amends or, quote, atonement. Peace to you all.